Protesters have marched in the US for a week over the death of George Floyd at the hands of a police officer. Their anger over the killing of the unarmed black man has now spread worldwide. From North America to Australasia and Europe to Africa, people have taken to the streets. Demonstrators gathered in London, Berlin, and Auckland, among other cities, to protest against police brutality in solidarity with the US crowds. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze George Floyd's death and how it has opened up racism wounds. Joining me on the program today are Professor Cecile Foster, Department of Transnational Studies, University of Buffalo, New York; Chidanand Rajgatta, Foreign Editor of the Times of India; and Gurjeet Singh, former Ambassador. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. All right, let me start the program first with you, Chidanand Rajgatta. Let us get a sense of, we've seen the videos, we've seen the horrific incident itself. It has been beamed live really across the world. Give us a sense of what's really happening on the ground in the United States.
Well, I can tell you, at least in Washington, D.C., it's an incredibly tense situation. I'm not sure if your viewers got to see what happened last night when first President Trump delivered an address essentially threatening to unleash, the U.S. military on its own citizens, including talking about, he retweeted a senator who said, "Let's see how the protesters handled the 101st Airborne Division." It was just staggering. And then they tear-gassed protesters, and there was a mounted charge against protesters gathered in front of the White House. Across the White House, there's a park in front of the White House, and across the park there's a church, the St. John's Episcopal Church. And they cleared out the crowd with tear gas so that the president could walk across and pose in front of the church with a Bible. It was really grotesque, to say the least. Mr. Trump is a self-confessed philanderer and not famously familiar with the Bible. And it was clearly, a show of machismo. And apparently the president was offended because the previous day, he had to be sheltered in a bunker, and that word got out and he felt very humiliated. So he had to show that he was in charge. But overall, across the country, there's been rioting. It's not always a pleasant sight. A lot of vandals have taken advantage of the situation. And there's been looting in New York and several other places. There's also been police excesses. There are many videos of police launching unprovoked attacks against protesters. There have also been instances of the police joining protesters. So it's a fairly complicated picture. It's not all simple. But the bottom line is this is a president who has shown very little empathy or, compassion. And his entire approach is strong arm. He seems to believe that use of overwhelming force against, the protesters and people. He calls them, basically all protesters have been tarred with being, radical leftists, Antifa, and thugs, and so on. He also berated, the governors of all states, calling them jerks and fools for not using force. So it's a very unpleasant picture, and it's staggering that this could be happening in a country which calls itself the greatest, democracy, the greatest country on the planet. In all my years here, 25 years plus, I have never seen anything like this. Not ever heard this kind of, it's unbelievable, really.
Okay, all right. So let's get a little bit of a history of the problem and take a look at, what the current situation is as well. Professor, what is the history of this particular problem, and why does it still exist even in 2020?
Indeed, and thank you for inviting me to participate. I think that, as so well put by the previous speaker, the history of what is happening. And I think that what we are looking at is now a true manifestation and explanation of what Mr. Trump meant when he says, make the America great again. I guess the great America he was thinking of was one that was...
Now, Ambassador, this particular issue, as such, were you surprised with the way that the protests and the Black Lives Matter movement has spread across the world.
Well, I am not surprised that the movement has spread, but I am astonished at the timing and the intensity of the way it's come out. Because at this moment, the world and more so the United States should actually have been more concerned about the impact of COVID-19. But instead of uniting the country behind that movement, you have resurrected old cleavages and taken them apart. That society today seems more wounded and rendered apart than any time before. Now, there is a long-term issue that the issue of black empowerment took a backseat in the election of President Trump. And the people who elected him actually then marginalized what the kind of people who are coming out today. So the great America that was born has not taken the Rainbow Coalition along. And it is actually quite a singular rather than a pluralistic vision. Having said this, after all, in the last 3 years, they have not been writing like this or people coming out and complaining. And it is also not that black people have not died at the hands of the police in the last 3 years. So there is this timing. So this timing, one comes from the political movement, which is frustrated that you could actually get 4 more years of President Trump. At the same time, there is this deep economic cleavage which has been created by COVID-19. At no time since the Great Depression has the American economy been doing as badly as now, particularly in the cause of employment. 36 million or more unemployed, 3 million in the pipeline, everybody wondering whether they will get the COVID relief for unemployed people. Healthcare is becoming more and more unaffordable. Even last year before COVID, 25% of the people said, I can't go to hospital, so I can't afford it. And today people say that even if I get COVID, I wouldn't go to hospital. So these societal cleavages based on economic performance and economic ability is extremely deep. And I think that timing has been ignited by the killing of this unfortunate gentleman in such a brutal manner.
Okay, all right. The professor has now rejoined us. Go ahead. Go ahead, Professor. You are making a point.
Thank you for having me back. I was saying that we now understand what Make America Great Again means. It refers to an America that was there before the 1960s, at a time when if you were from places like India or from Africa or elsewhere, you were not supposed to be part of the main society. If you were there at all, you were perhaps as a laborer, but really you had no say as a citizen. And I think that the message that is on the street is that enough is enough. And one of the things that we can take away from what we are viewing is how multiracial and multicultural the young people that are on the street who are standing up and saying, this history has to stop. There is no way that we can continue to have a history where significant members of the society are simply lost when it comes to having the rights of citizenship.
Talking about, all that's been happening, you started off, Chirana Rajgatta, about, talking about what the situation in the United States and in Washington, D.C. is like at this point in time. What implications is it going to have on the elections? Because this is an election year in the United States, and that we can't forget about that as well. So is this going to have any bearing on the elections?
Well, obviously, I don't think there's any doubt about that. And also, President Trump left very little doubt that he has an eye on the election. Everyone has started, it's a fairly cynical thing to do, but everyone looks at this whole thing through the prism of elections. There are a lot of pundits who are actually weighing this to see how it will impact. The sense is that, that there'll be a consolidation of white votes, behind Mr. Trump, that his base will be galvanized. And he himself has made it very clear. This morning, for instance, just before I got on this program, there were 10 tweets by the president essentially talking about endorsing, strong candidates. He on Twitter, he endorsed, I think, 10 Republican candidates, saying these are strong law and order candidates. And this is a rather, gratuitous thing to take up in the middle of race riots across the country. I mean, it's just astonishing. He seems completely oblivious to the fact that there needs to be some amount of, compassion and healing. That the immediate task on hand is to, pacify the population, to pacify the people. And instead is constantly talking about ratings, about, election, about, and the whole idea that, you're presenting yourself as a law and order, president who's going to use military might, it's just quite astonishing. So, yeah, I mean, the political pundits are looking at, the fallout. Many pundits are harking back to 1968, when Richard Nixon won office on the back of, race riots across the country and what was then called white anxiety. And of course, the whole idea here seems to be to consolidate his base.
Okay, all right. Professor, you rejoined us now, so let me quickly try and get an answer out of you as well about the spontaneous protests that the ambassador was talking about. The spontaneous protests tell us that there is still a massive divide really in our societies, and there is an underlying problem that hasn't been addressed. How do we really address this particular problem, and do you believe that the protests are more about the frustration and desperation that the blacks feel around the world?
Very much so, and one of the key things that we can note is how multiracial the protests on the street are, and where I think that there is common sense in the younger generation that something has to change. And I think the consensus, and as we saw with the unleashing of the power in the military against the peaceful protesters in Washington the other night, is that the problem is in the White House, and the problem is at that higher level, and not only President Trump, but perhaps people in the Republican Party that support him, and that there is a need for a cleansing. And that's why I think that so many people are hopeful that come November, that there will be a great outpouring of that frustration. That maybe in 1968, it might have been white fright at that time, but in 2020, let's hope that it is maybe more of a multiracial reaction to saying, let's have some sense of fairness and equity and put an end to a racist history.
Okay, all right, Ambassador. We've seen several protesters coming out on the streets in the capitals of Europe as well. And let's not forget that Europe too has a history when it comes to racism. Is this going to trouble the political class in Europe?
I think today in Europe, almost anything President Trump does seems to trouble them. So it is not only this issue. I think Europe has its own problems of cleaved societies.
They have their own.
Perhaps they are not the same. Sometimes, like in Germany, they recreated a new history in 2015, this time by bringing in migrants, which have brought out old fears, what was recently what Mr. Rajagatta called white anxiety. A huge amount of white anxiety in Germany about the new immigrants. In Germany, 3 generations ago, the Turks came in, and the Turks were white, but they were Muslim. Till today, they are not called Germans, they are called Turks. So, I mean, integration is not easy. Integration in no society is easy. The French prided themselves that all the people from Africa are part of one France. And therefore, if they live in Paris or wherever, they are French. But I think over the years, they have seen when rioting breaks out, that the sense of discrimination, which stems not only from social, but very strong economic discrimination, I think is so huge that the society is not unified. Similarly, in Britain, I think there are many issues, and one of the issues Britain had for Brexit was not to let immigration flood Britain any further, but I think they can't take this anymore. Similarly, in all the smaller countries, Austria or the Benelux country, I think the issue of migration today and integration of old migrants is a very serious issue. I think in Norway, you had that young man, like you saw in New Zealand, shooting up people simply because they were different. Now, what difference? I don't think it makes it to them. Simply because you are different, you are liable to see a reaction. And when the reaction becomes discriminatory and violent, I think that is when societies start crumbling. Now, whether the United States is a crumbling society or is a crumbling edifice, I am not so certain, because I am actually astonished, as I said, at the speed and spontaneity with which these cleavages at the time of COVID-19 have come forth in a most unexpected manner.
Absolutely. All right. So since we are here then, Chidanand Rajgatta, this is not something new like the other speakers and you yourself have spoken about, and we keep hearing and reading about racism in the news. But let's talk about another aspect. You know, how big an issue is institutional and structural racism in the West?
You know, it's been there, and my sense is for a few years, you know, in the 90s, people forgot about it. There was a lot of economic prosperity, the dawn of the internet era. It seemed for a while that all this was receding into the background and it was an equal opportunity society. But, you know, to be honest, it's always been there. Even through the Obama years, actually, it's been there. I don't think President Obama addressed the issue well enough. One of the enduring images I have of the protest is there was a man in his 60s who was carrying a placard which said, "I'm 66 and I can't believe I'm still protesting against this." So, you know, the last 60 years it's been there. What happened was, in this case, there were several back-to-back triggers. Even before the murder of George Floyd under the knees of that policeman, there were two or three incidents which did not get the kind of attention they would have got because of the whole COVID episode. In January this year, there was a young black man who was running through a white neighborhood in Georgia who was shot dead by two white vigilantes, one of whom was a security officer, on the mere suspicion of robbery. And this happened in January, and the tape of this murder did not surface till March, and it surfaced quite accidentally. So here's a country, one of the most, the most advanced, democracy according to them, where a broad daylight murder, which was videotaped, did not get any attention at all, but for an accident. And then there was an incident in Central Park where a white woman was walking a dog, called police because she felt threatened by a black man who merely asked her to leash her dog because it was disturbing. He was a bird watcher and it was disturbing the birds. And these kind of incidents, they are everyday incidents in the United States. Every day. This happens all the time. Young black men are actually instructed. There's a young black man who posted a message saying his mother tells him, behavioral, instructions when he steps out of the house. Don't play music loudly. Don't get into confrontations. Don't drive fast. So, the Bob Dylan, the singer and the poet and the Nobel laureate, 50 years ago, he wrote about this. He wrote songs about this. That if you're black, you might as well not show up on the street because you're going to draw the heat. That was one of his songs. And so this has been there throughout. And like I said, for a few years, perhaps for a decade, it receded into the background. But yes, institutional racism exists. If you're a young black man in this country, there's a very high chance that you had some kind of encounter with the prison system. At least 25% of young black men have been in prison at some point of time on the most frivolous charges, minor charges. And one of the messages yesterday I read was there was a white guy who said, this entire episode involving George Floyd began apparently because he tried to buy something with a $20 bill, which was a counterfeit bill. We don't know whether he knew about it or not. But the fact of the matter is, this white man said, when George Floyd conducted a transaction with a $20 counterfeit bill, it cost him his life. If I, a white man, had done it, it would have been a story I'd be telling at a party. And that is the essential difference between being black and white. The white privileges, it becomes a joke or a party story about, oh, I tried to, transact with a $20 bill. It turned out to be fake.
Absolutely.
And so that really highlights, the division in the society and the problem of institutional, racism, which has never really gone away.
Okay. It is a big problem, like the previous speaker just pointed out, Professor, but, how do we, transform this whole problem? What's the best way forward? How do we ensure that, people don't see race the way they've seen it over the last few decades or more?
I think that sometimes we put a lot of the onus on the wrong people, and that is the people who are suffering the results of race, who have to protest. It comes a point when society, those who are in control, need to look at themselves in the mirror and to say, what are we doing to maintain the system? This is why I was kind of heartened when I saw that the bishop for the St. John's Church came out and denounced what happened and what happened in the name of religion, in the name of the church. And this was a white bishop. I think that we have reached a point where the example was given of the 66-year-old man who is saying 66 years later he is still protesting and asking for change. What more can he do? So it is up to the wider society, and this is where we have to talk about the morality of society. And this is where it is not different from when we talk about what's happening with COVID, where there seemed to be that rush to reopen the society, where there seemed to be a point of saying that there are a certain number of lives that are disposable. And there's obviously the argument that COVID is hitting hardest the black and brown bodies, and those are the ones who are the essential workers. And if you are going to reopen the society, those are the ones that are going to be carrying the brunt. So there is no separation from that way of thinking and from the feeling that life for certain people are so disposable that it can be easily lost on the street, or it can even be lost if you go into a plant where you are killing chickens or whatever. So there's a sense that there's a need for a change in the morality. And what is harmful is that I think that people like President Trump and others recognize this, but he is offering a morality that is even worse than what we have evolved into, because he is looking to go back to a previous time when, in fact, we can argue that there was no morality.
Okay, all right. And, Ambassador, close the show for us with your concluding remarks on the best way forward.
Well, it's a sad day, but the best way forward, I think, is not one unified way. But I like what the professor said. It's an issue of morality. But morality has different connotations at different times. Like the bishop of the church has shown good morality, the police have not. But not all bishops have come out looking good, while not all policemen have come out looking bad. So I think law enforcement and political leadership seem to be the two important areas which need to be addressed now. If you can have an equality in their view, then perhaps equality has a chance. The next, of course, remains the equality of opportunity in society and in the economy. Because unless everybody has the same rights, as Professor said, you will have the black population largely doing the lower end of the works and then having a different brunt of the economy. I think you need many more judges who are not white. You need many more policemen who are not white. You need many more leaders who are not white. You need a rainbow coalition of pluralism to come up, because that is the way you will instill a new confidence and perhaps educate the next generation that we may look different, but we are all actually creations of the same God. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. On that note, then, I'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of this discussion is that race has been a problem that has existed for a long time now, and it continues to exist in our societies. The only way that we can get rid of it is if we have a systemic change, and also we need better integration to ensure that everyone is carried along. With that, it's a wrap. See you again next.